Hey, 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 it's Luke Johnson. Uh, I make Noetic. It's an app. You should download it for your iPhone and Android devices. And every week, I talk to my good buddy, my good friend, Robert Schut, about something involving Kierkegaard. And for those who have been following along, we are on our 19th installment of Soren Kierkegaard's Works of Love. There's a little bit of a confusion last week about what installment we were in. I apologize for that. That was my error. A lot of irons in the fire. And Bob will be leading the discussion this week. So, Bob, take it away.
Okay, 19, huh?
Right, 19, right?
Yeah, I think so. We should offer plaques or something, some kind of an award to people, certificates or something for those people who have seen every episode, right?
One day. It's all part of the plan.
Okay. All right, so we go into what's called Section 5. My Section 5 begins on page 261, and it's called The Love Hides a Multiplicity of Sins. I enjoyed this section, but I have to admit that there's parts of this that I really had to read and then walk away from it and think about to understand in depth what he was trying to get at. So this will probably stimulate a little conversation between you and I. Maybe we see eye to eye on some of these things, maybe not. And either way, it should be interesting. But we talk about here a multiplicity, which kind of grabs you right there. What is a multiplicity of sins? You know, how can you read the chapter and you don't really grasp the idea? He does kind of explain it, but like our friend Kierkegaard, he never really gives you an explicit definition in most of the time. But you usually get enough information if you read it enough in order to kind of get an idea of what he means. And what I think he means here, Luke, is that he's talking about the many facets or characteristics of sin, as well as the ability of sin to multiply itself or be multiplied. Would you say that was a fair analysis of that word, multiplicity of sins, or did you see something else in there that I didn't capture?
I think that captures the idea. I don't have any objections on the face of it. So okay. I see you have 9 pages of notes, so I'm going to only interject when absolutely necessary.
Okay. So he opens up with speaking about temporal and the eternal, which was kind of 2 of his most favorite subjects. And the temporal, he says, has 3 times, which he's mentioned before, past, present, and future. But he says the temporal is never complete because nothing exists in all 3 times simultaneously. So something is either in the past, it's in the present, or it's in the future, or it's kind of sliding through the time warp there, going from one to the other, making a transition. But nothing exists in the temporal in all 3 at the same time. And then he gives us a new vocabulary word, reduplication. It says reduplication does not have a temporal object, as the temporal disappears in time. It only exists in its characteristics. So reduplication will be another subject that will slowly define itself here for us. So I don't want to spoil the surprise too soon. So we'll wait till we get to that. But it says that the reduplication does not have a temporal object, as the temporal disappears in time. So at least we can say, well, the temporal disappears in time. What exists now will eventually become the past, and it will somewhat fade away, fade into the past. So he's saying that things here that exist in this world only fade away in time, eventually disappearing. But the eternal in man reduplicates itself always. In other words, it continues to recreate itself for eternity. It exists in what he calls a double mode, the inward and the outward. So reduplication here, and what we want to kind of look for as we go through the text, is the ability of something to continually reproduce itself, continue to recreate itself. Might be another word we might use. Instead of reduplicate, we might say recreate. The thing to understand here is that the eternal doesn't exist merely in its outward characteristics that fade in time, but it is or it exists as these characteristics. I think what he's talking about here, Luke, is essence. I think he's saying that in the temporal, we see things in the sensual, sight, sound, touch, and so forth. And those things tend to live in time, but only one time. Then they disappear. But he starts talking about man here, and he says this this idea of having both inward and outward characteristics that actually become one and blend together. I see this as more him trying to explain what the essence of a thing is in existence. Would you say?
Yeah, I like the way that you're talking about this, and you know, I'm concurrently teaching this seminar that you guys can also find on the app for Brave New World. And one of the interesting things about teaching Brave New World is that you have to kind of familiarize yourself with Shakespeare, because John the Savage, that's how he interacts with the world, is through quotations from Shakespeare. And one that I came across that might be relevant to what Bob is saying is this one from a play that I'll probably butcher the name of it. It's called Troilus and Cressida. And the quote reads, "Outliving beauty's outward with a mind that doth renew swifter than blood decays." And I just thought that would be a meaningful contribution to what Bob is saying.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The characteristics of, he uses man as an example here. And he says the characteristics of a man are inseparable from whom man is. This is this idea of reduplication here. When the outward and the inward work together as one. So you can't, so like with man, you can't separate the inward and the outward without destroying what man is. Man isn't just a body, in other words, but is known by his character, which is revealed outwardly. So our character is something we reveal outwardly, but it's not something separate from who we are. So I think he's talking about the unity of man, the ability of man to go through time, continually recreating himself at every moment. Now, there's an example of reduplication here on page 261, where he now slides into the idea of love. How does love fit into this? He said, so it is with love. What love does, it is. And what it is, it does at one and the same moment. So you can see here the fusion of the inward and the outward create love. Love doesn't have inward and outward properties that we can isolate from one another. What we see about love inwardly is exactly what love is outwardly. And they're fused together, so you can't separate one from the other. And I imagine that's in our perception of love, probably a good way to look at it.
Can I ask you a question, Bob?
Yes.
So I had a conversation with someone this weekend, and it got me thinking about this particular issue about the inward and the outward. And if we have sort of reduplicated ourselves by internalizing the eternal, right? Recreated ourselves in time,
yes.
which was what I think you're getting at with this idea of reduplication in temporality. What does that love look like in your estimation? Because it's not like Christian love as it is outwardly manifested after one undergoes the profound inner revolution is all the same. Like, I think that I have Christian love, and I try to show love to my brothers and sisters by trying to bring them information, bring them knowledge. But a lot of times, a lot of the information and knowledge that I bring is not things that they want to hear. It's not always comforting. Does that show that I haven't had that profound reduplication experience? Or does that show that there are multiple ways to express the love that is going on within us? Should every Christian just be this joyous, happy being that never concerns itself with the scriptures often ignored?
Okay. Well, who was the man who is the man that we might say, if we could even call him a man, to quote Josephus, who is filled with the most human love, the capacity of human love above all other men.
Human love?
Yeah, who would you say has expressed love above all other men?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay. Was he a happy dude?
Not when he was being crucified.
Well,
and this was my point in this conversation too, is that I was like, yeah, I don't think the apostles were like, I think the apostles had a fair amount of suffering and anguish, especially since like 11 out of the 12 met untimely demises. And I was like, I guess this whole idea that contemporary Christianity has to put on a big smile all the time and be like, oh, geez, everything's just great as the world burns.
Yeah, well, they don't know me very well. But the idea here is that there may have been times around the campfire, Jesus might have, said something or done something where they laughed together. I'm not saying that Jesus never laughed, but Jesus was a very serious man. Very, very serious man. And he withdrew himself from the disciples many times to go into deep meditation, deep thought, deep prayer. He just doesn't impress me in what's written about him as a guy going around giving everybody high fives. Just, just doesn't impress me as that kind of a man. Okay. And so we've got, I think it's not that we have to be serious falsely, put on a serious mask. That wouldn't be any better than putting on a happy face mask. The idea is we have to learn to be what the Holy Spirit wants us to be. And sometimes it's going to be smiling and laughing, and sometimes it's going to be very serious, and sometimes we're going to cry. And we can't hide all those faces. We have to be all those faces. So I would say that. But in answer to love and the context of what I'm talking about here, I would say a way to describe it would be love continually becomes love. Okay. So when we're in love, it's not an event. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a feeling. It's that love continues to become love.
Yeah, that's what I think I was trying to get across last week in my lesson, is that it's more of a mode of being than an isolated action.
Okay. And then we're going to talk about, later on, we'll talk about sin in the same way, almost in the same way. I have a little piece of that. So man, we know from both internal, which I would call spiritual, and external, which might call physical characteristics. So man has both his internal characteristics and his external, and we tend to see, or hope that we see, his internal characteristics based upon his outward activities and acts. But this is also true of love. Love has particular characteristics that make it love. So obviously, there's a difference between love and hate. So we have a spiritual acuity to recognize the difference between love and hate. At least we hope we do. We believe we do. And if these qualities were removed from love, it would no longer be love. So that's what I mean. You can't separate the qualities of love from love itself, because when you do, you turn love into something else. So love has a particular behavior by which we recognize it. Kierkegaard tells us that the lover, being a lover, casts out fear in others. But the mistrustful person scares everybody. They don't bring confidence to us, as does the lover. He talks about the difference between a lover and a mistrustful person. And this is just obvious. I think that if you're around somebody who truly loves you, it builds your confidence up. You can exhale. You can feel safe and comfortable. But you have somebody who's mistrustful, you don't want to close your eyes. You want to keep your eyes on them. So you're not relaxed. And this is simply what he's trying to say here. And love not only brings confidence here, but it also has confidence, or it might say it also is confidence. So here, again, we see the fusion of love. Love not only brings us confidence, so the lover, in other words, not only delivers confidence to the beloved, but he himself is confidence. He has confidence in his love. If we have love, we bring confidence to others as well as to ourselves by the possession of it. So in this way, we're talking about the reduplication. So we have love, we give it to others, but it's not like we lose it. We reduplicate it in ourselves the more we give it. And when that person gives love, he reduplicates it in himself. He gives it to somebody else, and yet he at the same time reduplicates it, energizes it, increases it, so to speak. He says that love saves from death. The lover saves others as well as himself from death. And I think that here he may be referring to the idea that love brings salvation to other people, because we bring that other person, his idea of love was to bring the other person into unity with God. So I'm trying to figure out, what does he mean by death here? And I think that's what he's trying to say, some kind of spiritual death, that love brings the other person to life. And again, this is another form of reduplication. Did you also think? Yeah.
I mean, it potentially could have a dual meaning, I should say. I think you're right to say that it ultimately saves one from their soul extinguished. But I mean, there's a lot of situations where without love we can become we become the hollow man.
Okay.
If you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
If we don't have this revolution within us, we become dead to the world.
Yeah. And you see, he goes on to say that love becomes part of the individual rather than something added to the individual, which is in keeping what I'm trying to say here, is that it's not like you add love to somebody. It's that you become love. You embrace it. You become fused together with love, united with love. So one does not add love as though it were a piece of clothing. I'm going to wake up this morning and put on my love jacket, and go around and love everybody. When I get home, I take it off. That's not love.
I have seen your love jacket, and it is very impressive. But
many colors.
I know. Well, not a lot of people know about your wardrobe from the '70s, and I have to say, as someone who's seen Bob's love jacket, it is a sight to behold.
Oh well, I'm trying to think of that TV show. Never mind. I don't want to go there. But love becomes part of a person, almost like one's name. It's not like your name is added to you. It's that you become your name and you live out your name. Your reputation is based upon your name. Now, of course, today is not as obvious as it used to be. When a person was called a particular name in the old days, very old days, the name was the parents' hope for the child. They call them, like the name Jesus means Yahweh, our salvation. It describes who Jesus is. And in those days, that was the expectation. The parents would name their child something that they hoped would benefit him, and then hope that the child would fulfill their destiny. So it's almost like giving them a destiny. And in the same way, that's what our name is. My name, I hope that I can live up to my name and my family name, and generations past me would respect my name because of that, because my name is who I am.
I have an interesting theology question for you real quick.
Okay.
About names. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
Right before we went on air, I was listening to a sermon about it being Jehovah Saves. And I'm just kind of curious if you know anything about Jesus's naming. Did the angel instruct Mary and Joseph to name him Jesus, or
well, the angel Gabriel said his name shall be called Emmanuel.
Right.
Okay. Because he will save his people. But I'm trying to remember now when he was named Jesus.
And of course, you know, he wasn't named Jesus. I mean, that's how we say it in English. But
yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess the proper name would have been Yahusha. Is that right, or something like that?
Yeshua.
Yeah,
Which is Joshua. Yeah, actually, I don't remember. I have to look that up. That's a great question, and I should know the answer to that. But I will look it up exactly when he was named Yeshua. It may have been the angel as well, because I know he said he will be called Emmanuel, for God is with us. Was I think a literal interpretation. Emmanuel. El, whenever you hear El in a name, it usually means God. When you hear Ja or Ya, it usually means Yahweh.
So the name was very important. It's a small detail, but it's really fascinating. It's a small detail that means a whole lot.
Well, let me throw another question out that we can both discuss for a second here. Is God's name, the name Yahweh, God's name, has many significant interpretations to it. But the one I like the most is he's called the being. It's translated as the being, more as a verb, the being one. I am that I am. It's another interpretation. But the one I like best is the becoming one. God
Why do you like that one best?
Because it explains Jesus, because it helps me to see Jesus as the God who becomes salvation.
Right, because he comes into time.
He comes into time. Exactly. Right. You captured the point I was trying to mention there. So the becoming one is kind of almost we're on the edge of discussing it here with Kierkegaard. That's why the only reason I'm bringing it up here. So it's very important that we capture the idea of becoming something. Very fluid, but it goes, becoming implies from one reality into another.
Right.
That God is coming from eternity into temporal.
Right.
That's why I like that interpretation the most.
I like that one a lot too. All right, I'm sorry to get us sidetracked there. Go back to the lesson. I just thought, you know, our audience and myself would benefit from hearing your thoughts on that.
Okay. So the lover doesn't think about saving himself here, but about giving confidence to the other, to the beloved. He forgets his own sufferings and focuses upon the sufferings of the other person. So this is what love is like. It forgets about the self. It's sacrificial love. That's what this is Christian love. Sacrificial love. I'm not worried about what happens to me right now. I'm worried about what happens to you. Okay. And Kierkegaard reminds us again, the old adage, God is love. But we hear this, and I'm going to put a little sidetrack in here now. We hear this expression so much today. I wonder if people really understand what they mean when they say God is love.
They don't. Okay. They don't.
Well, I mean, we all get caught up in this. And I think it's important to, as an instruction to other people, I'm not criticizing others, because I realize that when you get when you get kind of like a saying like this, like a proverb, or I can't think of another word for it. You're great with words. You get a little expression. Yeah. God is love. It kind of becomes just a little saying like, have a nice day. And unfortunately, that's what happens after a while. It's just automatic. So I want to try to revive that a little bit. We have to take care when we use the expression God is love. It's used a lot today with little thought as to the depth and the seriousness of this statement. True love is divine love and inherently has the righteousness of God. We forget that love of God, God's love inherently is fused with the righteousness of God. And it enters right into what we're talking about when we talk about reduplication. God's love reduplicates itself in us. But it reduplicates not just this euphoric feeling of well-being, but it reduplicates his righteousness in us. And that's what we're failing to get today. That's a message that's my message that I try to get out to other people, Luke, is the love of God includes God's righteousness. If it doesn't, then it just isn't God's love. Okay? It's an imitation. And there's some mighty good imitations out there. Okay? I'll tell you. Okay. It doesn't exist without God's character, his love. And this includes his righteousness. We'll see this when Kierkegaard talks more about reduplication. But I think slowly, I think we're getting an idea of what reduplication is. Even just me talking about it, it's clarifying in my own mind what it is. It's a very difficult concept. The self-lover insists upon his own rights and does not want to be forgotten. So he has two major things, he says. The self-lover, the one who loves himself more than the beloved, is interested in two things. I want my rights, okay? And second, I don't want to be forgotten. I need a statue or a painting of myself so the world can remember me. Those are two big concerns.
I've never seen you so animated, Bob. It's going to be hard for me to edit out those fist pounds that you just did.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll have to sit on my hands here.
Please, some self-control. Even as a nightmare for the audio engineering.
The Pentecostal in me is starting to come out. Okay. The lover doesn't think about himself and is not concerned about others remembering himself, or in other words, others remembering him, because he's remembered by God. So, and this is what I've learned over the years. I was in the other side. I'll firmly admit it. I was in the side where I wanted my rights and I wanted to be remembered. And now I've come to a time in my life where I'm not really interested in being remembered by other people. I'm more interested in God remembering me.
Oh, yeah. And guess what, Bob? Okay. The interesting thing is, I think the more that we take that mentality, oftentimes the more we're remembered by other people. You will be remembered, trust me.
Well, I hope I will be remembered well, but history will yet to reveal that. Okay, page 262 on reduplication. Note the reduplication here, : what the lover does, he is, or he becomes. What he gives, he is, or more accurately, this he acquires. So now I think we can see reduplication and why I like to use that word becoming, because the lover continues to become love. And each time he loves, he reduplicates himself in love, internally and externally. So when one loves by giving, he acquires what he gives. An act of love overwhelms us when we love, and we become part of the process of loving. So love is reduplicated in that the one who loves becomes love. So it's not like you lose anything when you love. You gain something when you love. Now he goes on to another little topic here. He says, how do we get rid of the multiplicity of sins? How do we stop sinning? How do we stop this chain of events, sin? And he gives us a few different methods. He says one he calls is love hides the multiplicity of sin. So what is the multiplicity of sin? It's the characteristics of sin and its ability to spread. So it's kind of a reduplication of a sense of sin, that a person sins and creates more sin, who creates more, and so forth. Love doesn't discover sin, but rather hides sin. Okay, this is a really interesting little section here on how we can stop sin, but it's very difficult. So love, he says, doesn't discover sin. Now here, I think what he's getting at is love doesn't look for sin. It doesn't seek evil. It's not an evil hunter. It's not like what was the name of the vampire hunter? I can't remember his name. You're pretty good with
The vampire hunter. Was it a movie?
Oh no. In the book, there was the guy who went around trying to hunt the vampires. He was always looking for vampires. He saw vampires in everybody. But that's the only. Maybe I'll remember it later on. He's a character.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up. You keep talking.
Okay. So the idea here is that the lover is not looking for evil in the beloved. Okay. And this is what this section is all about. So he begins by this section here by saying that scientists view science as having no limit to discovery. So science, it's not like science runs out of discoveries. It's not like the more you discover, eventually there's nothing left to discover. But there's always something left to discover. If we discover something, we get the praise of the world. Explorers, scientists who discover things and places, they get their names are, they get plaques on the wall, or they get countries named after them, or they get holidays like Columbus Day, or they take holidays away like Columbus Day, replace it with something else. Those who discover cures or geographic locations become famous people, and those who don't discover anything are considered kind of more lowly. So if you don't discover, and I think, isn't this part of like the PhD thing for scientists? They're ambitious to discover something to get their names known.
Can I put air quotes around the word discover?
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes, I think somebody already did.
Hey.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of vampire hunters.
Oh, are there
out there? But I don't think you were referring to Wesley Snipes' Blade character
or Buffy, and I wasn't referring to Buffy.
There's even in some movie, I believe, there's even Jesus Christ vampire hunter. But I'm gonna, knowing my Bob Schut, I'm gonna say you were thinking about Van Helsing.
That's the guy, Van Helsing. Thank you.
There's even one called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I think there are so many vampire hunters. There are like 50 of them.
Okay. Well, the idea there, I mean, we bring a little levity into the session here, probably relieves a little stress, but the idea here is that the lover doesn't look for evil like Van Helsing was always hunting for vampires. So the lover now, and the reason he's talking about discovery, he's saying the lover discovers nothing. So he's considered low in the eyes of the world. Even discovering evil is considered better than discovering nothing. How does one discover evil? Well, I think we see it all the time, the eagerness to find evil in pastors and teachers, or even just those claiming to serve God. The world is just anxious to find dirt on people. Well, sometimes it's valid, but many times it isn't valid. But the world loves finding dirt about good people. If one discovers good qualities in people, he usually doesn't get much praise. If we can't discover evil, we can sometimes make it up, and we call that gossip. So we're going to talk about gossip a little bit. Many times people try to entertain others through the evil that they've discovered or not discovered, make up through gossip. I think we see this a lot of times in our society. In some sense, evil is something that people like to discuss. It makes one instantly popular, whether the rumors are true or false. I think I think many of us, can't say all, but I think many of us have been exposed to that. We sit around in groups and somebody says, hey, did you hear about Bob Schut? Oh, no. What? Oh, let me tell you this story here. It doesn't matter if it's true.
Well, I was hanging out with him one time, and he brought out the love jacket. Well, no, I think the idea of bearing false witness and interesting to me as someone who into a lot of alternative narratives. You know, the thing I ask myself, if I question official stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I don't necessarily accept what's handed down to me from authority, am I searching out the evil? Am I gossiping in the quest to do an expose?
Yeah. And I think that becoming a Christian doesn't make us immune to the power of gossip. I mean, it should, and it ought to, and that should be our goal. And we should always be on guard against it, most certainly be on guard against gossip. But we all tend to fail occasionally. But again, it's not that we succeed or fail. We succeed if we're alert and if we're aware of it, and if we catch it, repent for it, and stop doing it. It's a habit. Gossiping is a habit. It really is. And it's so easy to acquire that habit. One of the things is it gives us this kind of instant popularity. As soon as you start telling dirt, people come from miles around to want to hear that dirt. I used to work with people like that. And it was like they just couldn't stop. It was like an addiction with them. They couldn't stop gossiping. And I'm not talking about the stereotype women housewives. I'm talking about engineer types. I'm talking about men. It's not.
Yeah, water cooler stuff.
Yeah.
Guy talk.
Yeah, real guy talk.
Locker room talk.
Right, locker room talk. So the lover doesn't discover anything, really. He hides the multiplicity of sins. So now we talk about the difference between creating rumors. So that's how what you do is that's how you recreate sin. That's how you multiply sin, by gossip. And see, that's what he's getting after here. So how then do you decrease sin? You don't gossip. You don't discover sin in people and spread it and talk about it. You stop it. Even if you see sin in them, as we'll get to, you don't talk about it and brag about it to other people. The lover doesn't wish to know or understand evil. He's not into the evil thing. Okay? If one gives, this is an expression he gives, and in today's world it means something a little different than it did to him. He says, if one gives evil the finger, it will soon take the whole hand. So what he's talking about is giving evil the finger means to simply, if you take a piece of the hand, eventually evil will take the whole hand. The miser sees the world through the eyes of wealth or gold. But actually good people should see the world through goodness, through righteousness. The way I like to phrase it, Luke, is the good person, the Christian, is always looking for truth. He shouldn't always be looking for the lies. He should be looking for truth. Because when he looks for truth, guess what? He finds the lies inadvertently.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. If you go looking for the truth, you don't have enough brain left over to concern yourself with that petty stuff.
That's right.
No, seriously. I'm obsessed with the truth, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And in this quest for the truth, people have done me wrong.
Yeah.
And I've interacted with those people that have done me wrong. And they've even said to me, how were you able to move past that? I was like, things I'm trying to figure out, so much truth that I'm after. I really don't have the brain capacity to even remember the wrong you did to me.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks for sharing that with everybody. I think that's very important to understand that it's not the willpower so much as it is power of truth. It draws us into truth, and we just don't have time for gossip. We don't have time for the nonsense, Now, Jesus gives us I'm going to give a quote from Jesus here because I think it's important. He says that in Matthew 6:21, he says, for where the treasure is, there will your heart be also. So that's how if we're stuck in gossip, that's where our treasure is, and that's where our heart is. But if we're stuck on truth, then that's where our heart is and our treasure is. So where do you want to be stuck? Do you want a heart of truth, or do you want a heart of evil? So an evil person then would tend to see evil in everything and even discover it when it doesn't exist. But the lover doesn't discover anything. Therefore, he hides the multiplicity of sin. Okay? So far, are you with me here about hiding the multiplicity of sin? Okay.
Thumbs up.
Okay. As a child plays a game when he makes believe he sees nothing, when it's right in front of him, the lover chooses not to see the evil. I guess he's kind of talking about little kids' games when you put your hands over your face or something like that, or you put them behind the sheet and say, "Where are you? Where are you? I don't see you. I can't find you." And it's a peekaboo, I guess is the universal name of the game. It's kind of like that game, that the child plays. He doesn't see what's right in front of him, or doesn't claim to see it. So he's not looking for the evil. So what love can't avoid seeing or hearing, what hides in silence. There are things, though. There are things. We may not be looking for it, but he says what love can't avoid seeing or hearing, what hides in silence. So certain things are going to be true. Certain evil, we're going to see certain evil. We can't necessarily make it not exist, but we don't have to gossip about it. We don't, if somebody tells us, or we discover something that somebody's done that was evil, we don't need to blab it to everybody else in the world. We don't need to get a hold of the newspapers and say, "Hey, guess what I found out? We can sell a lot of papers. I can make a lot of money." Its idea is silence can stop that evil, even real evil, no less evil that's made up. When a lover comes to know a man's sin, he keeps it in silence rather than telling the world about it. And we have to remember here that this is a relationship between the lover and the beloved. Not necessarily all relationships, but this is a relationship between the lover and the beloved. And the beloved is supposed to be our neighbor, not simply our wife or our daughters or our husbands or somebody. Not intimate love, but this is our neighbor. This is how we should treat our neighbor. But his is not a silence of something that didn't happen, but something that really did happen. So he talks about silence as not only should we be silent about rumors, but we have to be silent even sometimes about what's real and sometimes what's true if it's evil, because we might find ourselves multiplying the sin. If a person tells about their sin, it increases the multiplicity of sin. Now, rumor, of course, increases the multiplicity of sin. It thrives off evil news, whether true or not. So men should learn to be silent and not inquisitive or frivolous or even envious about another's sin or corruption. But we all know how attractive that is to a person, how attractive evil is. We were talking about that earlier. Evil is very attractive to people in different forms, and gossip is one form. We don't want to report our neighbor's fault because it helps to corrupt men. But every man has an inclination to see his neighbor's fault and maybe even exaggerate them. In their weaknesses, they create an attentive audience who thrives off such information. I think we all may have run into such people who seek popularity by telling the latest gossip about their neighbor. This tends to put them in center stage, and we might even be such a person or have been such a person. And if you are, this is a good opportunity to confess it and repent for it. Kierkegaard says that Kierkegaard says that he would rather enter into eternity with 3 repented murders than a retired scandalmonger with such criminality heaped up year after year. This is a quotation from him.
That was probably my favorite passage from this section.
Oh, I'm glad I included it. So, this is the idea that at least Kierkegaard saw scandal, and he was a victim of scandal, I might add, a lot of scandal in his days, so bad that he couldn't even go to church. That's how bad it got. So he's kind of, in the front of all of this in experience. So he says he'd rather go to eternity with 3 repented murders than be a scandal monger. Okay, so now 270, we have another quotation. I think we do here. I have it written down up here. Okay, it is this kind of person who puts men in their graves, embitter the most intimate relationships, and injure the most innocent sympathizers, besmirch the young, mislead and corrupt both young and old. So this is his opinion of scandalmongers or gossip people. He says it's like setting fire to a whole community. And what's so ironic is that people even pay for such entertainment. And this fits so well, Luke, into our society today when people want to buy the latest scandal rags at the checkout counter in supermarkets, all about the celebrities' latest divorces and pregnancies and whatever else is going on with movie stars, like they're fair game. But they're our neighbor. They're our neighbor. So if you participate in gossip, even about celebrities, you still are a scandal monger.
What do you think about celebrity in general? I think it's really dawned on me recently how much they are idols, like literally biblical idols. And what's very, very interesting to me about this, it's like just like in your face. And now I have eyes to see this. They are given idols when they accomplish their task well, right? Like they are given the Oscar, yeah. Graven images, yeah. Little idols, yeah. When they are good at being an idol.
Yeah.
Bob, that's a big deal.
It is a very big deal. The entertainment industry is very tempting for people. It's a lure. It lures people into it. And just listening yesterday, I was watching some news on the 700 Club, and they were doing like a testimony of this rock singer who became a very famous celebrity. And he said that when he went out on stage and he heard the people screaming and he said practically worshiping me, I felt like a god.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I watch live concert footage, and it's sickening to me now.
Yeah. Well, I can't imagine. I mean, it would be so hard and so tempting for an individual to go out in such an environment and continue to be humble and not think of himself any higher than the people in the audience. It would take a very special person. So my opinion of being celebrity is it's not the place I think where God really wants to put us because of the danger. That doesn't mean he can't select unique individuals who can overcome that. But I think we have to take a lot of care and concern when we want to put ourselves in that position of temptation.
Yeah, they should just, the next award show that they come up with, they should just hand out golden calves. Like instead of Oscars or Emmys or whatever else, they should just hand out little gold cows. Let's just get it all out in the open.
Yeah. Okay, but the lover hides the multiplicity of sin now with an explanation. So now it goes from silence. Another way is explanation. Maybe we can hide sin with explanation. Or not hide sin, hide the multiplicity of sin. In other words, stop sin in its tracks here. An explanation usually explains something that is. Usually we don't refer to an explanation to a rumor. An explanation is something that actually happened, and it requires an explanation. So when we explain things, we choose to use the most mitigating explanation. At least the lover does. We do this to soften the result of the sin. So we should try to find an alternate explanation for the sin. Why did this sin happen? Why did this situation occur? Not that we should make excuses. I don't think he means we should make excuses for it. I think, though, we should try to examine it and try to understand what really happened here, and then explain it in the most simplest terms rather than exaggerate it. I think this is only something that we do when we confronted the public with the public, so that we don't spread rumors. I think that we have to keep what's private private. When we try to take what's private and make it something public, it's so easy to make it bigger than it actually was. It's kind of like the proverbial fishing story. You know, the reality of it, the fish is actually this big, but by the time you tell all your friends, the fish is this big. You know, and I think it's the same thing. It's just our nature to want to expand stories and make them bigger and more important than they actually are.
And I also think it's our nature to want to believe the fish story, to want to believe the lie. What's interesting that you bring up here, I told you earlier off camera that I went to a musical over the weekend, and I actually went and saw Big Fish, the musical.
I did, and I didn't know that, just so that everybody watching, I didn't know that, so I'm setting you up for this, but I had no clue.
But what I was trying to say to Bob earlier is that the analogy of all the world being a stage is actually reality, that we choose to believe the illusion and not what's going on beyond the illusion. And it was interesting seeing community theater and seeing how you have to suspend your discernment in order to really get the experience. There is a crazy storm kicking up here, Bob. So my window.
Tornado?
I don't know what's going on.
Twister? Oh, okay.
There's something, but if we get disconnected or the window blows out and I get a bunch of glass in my face, just keep going.
Oh, well, say hello. Okay, say hello to the wizard for me, okay?
I want you to know something. I don't talk to wizards. I do not. The Bible says, do not engage in sorcery or wizardry. I have no interest in that. I won't even go to a Wizards basketball game anymore.
Oh, okay. All right, now he talks about detectives. He says the detectives ought to try to find the guilt and the evidence of guilt, because that's their job. Their job is to look for the evil, to look for the sin. But it's not the job of the lover. But most of us are really inclined to discover evil rather than the good, which is what you was just saying. Yeah. Now he goes and he switches to the third one. He says, love hides a multiplicity of sin by forgiveness. Okay, this one seems a little bit more obvious. The other two, a little bit more subtle. So we have the mitigating interpretation removes something from the multiplicity by showing that this or that was nevertheless not a sin. So in the previous method of hiding multiplicity, where we talked about explanation, he's saying that what we try to do is explain it away as it really wasn't a serious sin, or it really wasn't sin at all. So that's what we can do in a situation, to explain it away that way. Of course, assuming it really wasn't sin. We explain that what happened was not really sin after all. But forgiveness now takes away what cannot be denied as sin. So when we finally come down to it and the beloved that we're talking to really does commit a sin, what can we do to mitigate it? What can we do to change the multiplicity or to hide the multiplicity? Forgiveness is the most significant way. He talks about the multiplicity of creation here. And this gets a little bit creative, I can say, on his part here. Maybe you and I can discuss this just a bit. I would say that he means in creation, that what he means here in creation, that many things are happening in creation and that one thing brings about another. There's kind of like a cascade going on in creation. And he says the untutored person really doesn't know much about creation, about this process. But this doesn't change anything. His lack of knowledge means only that it might not exist for him, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in reality. Did you get any more out of this multiplicity of creation than this idea that creation is a process that continues to go on, and one thing creates another, which creates another in the process of creation? Or do you think I'm missing the point here?
I actually might need you to recapitulate the thing you said before that so I can answer that more accurately. I was seeing if there was a tornado going on, but what was your point again?
Okay, I'll go over this again. He says, talks about this multiplicity of creation, he calls it, but he doesn't really explain it. And so I would say that it means that in the process of creation, that many things are going on in creation, and there's like a cascading of processes. One thing is created, right, that something else is created from that, and something else from that. And so the only way I could make sense of what he means by multiplicity of creation is that it's a continuing process that continues to create.
It sounds plausible. I didn't have an alternate reading of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it raises larger questions of time about whether or not God's creation is something that is finished in some respect somewhere, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then, given our limited temporal perspective, that it gives the appearance of being created. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I think we can say that it continues on, from our perspective, to constantly be created. But there's a larger question about whether or not it's all finished.
Yeah. Well, it appears that in Scripture, the creation process has ended, but I hate to say evolution process because that sends off all sorts of alarms, but the unfolding of creation continues to occur. But creation is done.
How do we say this? The creation of the world is done,
mm-hmm,
but the unfolding of history is an ongoing process.
Absolutely. I would agree 100% with that. Yeah.
Unless we are to take biblical eschatology as some sort of completion of creation. But at least my reading of Genesis is such that, God rested when he was done. That's
correct. And it's very important and significant that God rested from his work on the Sabbath, because the Sabbath has a great implication into Christ, who is the finish. He is the Sabbath. He came into the Sabbath, so we live in the Sabbath. So it's kind of very important to our theology that it is a finished event. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off. Faith relates to what is not seen. We can see the things of the world, but not things such as forgiveness. So it's not like, we can see forgiveness in the sense that we can hear it and we can see acts of forgiveness, but forgiveness itself we cannot see. Somebody could certainly imitate forgiveness, and we might not know the difference, because forgiveness goes on internally in the spiritual realm of our minds.
It might be a publicity stunt.
It could be a publicity stunt, very well. Or it could be a person lying to themselves saying, I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to forgive, so I'm going to say I forgive you, because if I don't, then I'm going to hell. So I'm going to say I forgive you, even though I don't really mean it. So there's all sorts of artificial forgiveness, but that's what the point here is, that we can't see it because it's something spiritual, something that we see through faith. Because sin is part of the world, it can be seen. Because if it weren't seen, it couldn't be forgiven. So he's telling us that although forgiveness is invisible, the sin certainly isn't. The event of sin certainly isn't. The lover is blessed because he believes what can't be seen. So it's a blessing for the lover because he believes in forgiveness and he forgives the beloved. And that's why he's blessed. And then Kierkegaard asks us a question here, Luke. He says, why is forgiveness so rare? Many want to forgive. Yeah, many want to forgive, but think that it probably won't be of any help to them. So why bother to forgive? Because this is actually, when you don't forgive, you're actually adding to the sin and its multiplicity. This is a sign of unloving by making an excuse for not forgiving. So,
well, my response to that would be, questions. Is true forgiveness possible apart from God? And I guess that would lead to the question, the reason why forgiveness is so rare is because it's so difficult to humble yourself before God. I think in my past, I could have said, oh yeah, I forgive this person for doing X, Y, or Z to me. But I think deep down, I didn't really.
mm-hmm.
Not until I deepened my religious relationship. What do you think?
I think there's in the Hebrew world, there's different levels of forgiveness. One level is you forgive a person in the sense that you forgive the obligation. So if you were to steal from me, I have a right to collect back from you not only what you stole, but with interest. Forgiveness would be to say, never mind, you keep it. I'm releasing you from the punishment, from the penalty. That's when Jesus teaches, if a man strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the left as well. The idea is, even though he strikes you, you have a right to strike him back again. You forego that right. That's forgiveness. So Jesus is actually teaching about forgiveness here, which a lot of people don't pick up on because they don't realize these different levels of forgiveness. But there's also a level of forgiveness where you not only forgive the obligation, but you forgive the act in such a way that you put it past you. You forget about it. But what you cannot do is offer the person forgiveness, divine forgiveness. Only God can forgive divinely. We can offer to the capacity that we have forgiveness. And we might say, if Christ is dwelling in us, this might be divine forgiveness. That a person might be forgiven by God through us forgiving them. Wouldn't that be a nice thought?
Well, it's at least some similitude of it. It's some, it's because I mean, really, that person still has to come before the judgment throne of God, but at least in our particular lives, we are acting it out in some way, some very small way.
Yeah, we could give them
because presumably the assaults that such a said individual has done against God himself would be much greater than whatever they did against us.
Yeah, and our forgiveness could be a foreshadow of the forgiveness that they'll have in heaven. So our forgiveness is so important, and I've actually never thought about it that way, how important our forgiveness is to another. It may be the only contact that an individual ever has with God. And so it's so important for us to forgive.
Well, that's why Jesus didn't want us to have armed rebellion, because he knew that contact with divine forgiveness would overtake the world in a way that military manifest destiny never would.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you there, my friend. Now, if a person withholds forgiveness, they increase the multiplicity of sin, because that in itself is another sin. Why? Because Jesus commands us to forgive sin. So when we don't, not only do we prevent that other sin from being forgiven, but we commit another sin by not forgiving. So we multiply the sin again. Sin requires punishment. So if forgiveness is withheld, it increases punishment. So we have all these cascading events that just keep increasing sin. Okay, page 276 here. Love hides the multiplicity of sin, for love prevents sin from coming into being. It smothers it at birth. So that's pretty neat. To prevent sin with love. Another way of hiding the multiplicity of sin is by not letting it take place in the first place. Prevention, right? Prevention. When sin is in the nature of a person, it waits for an opportunity. Scripture says that the opportunity is in the commandment or the prohibition. Okay, this we have some. I think we can talk about this a little bit here as I finish up. It didn't cause the sin. In other words, the commandment or the prohibition, thou shalt not do something, or thou shalt. That's the commandment and the prohibition. He says it creates an opportunity for sin. It says it didn't cause the sin, but it brought it about by providing an opportunity. This is a condition that unconditionally does not give an occasion to sin, or there is a condition which unconditionally does not give occasion to sin, which is love. But this is not just human love. Sin can never, it says that sin can even use love as an occasion to sin. So that might require a little discussion to find examples of that. And then he says there are many restraints invented to hold the insane, but there's nothing that can restrain sin better than love. And before we discuss this little last piece here, let me read the final quote here, the final line, sentence of this chapter. It says, woe unto the man by whom offense comes. Blessed is the lover who by refusing to give occasion hides the multiplicity of sins. So we don't want to provide an occasion for sin, and love prevents that occasion. So let's talk about how a commandment, Luke, of do not do this can create an opportunity to sin. How does that happen?
What do you mean by there being a prohibition that ultimately gives rise to the curiosity of the thing to do? Because I always heard that from like the cool parents. Like when I was growing up, they were always like, well, if you tell your kids not to do something, they're just going to go and do it. So you might as well introduce them to that illicit thing they're not supposed to do because we're a cool mom and dad.
We're a new age mom and dad, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Is
Well,
that what you're getting at? Like if God had never said don't eat of that of the tree of good and evil, then maybe Adam and Eve never would have like been enticed to do it.
Exactly. That's what he's talking about. And I'm trying to find it here in Romans. I wanted to find it earlier, but I didn't get a chance. Where he talks about this. He talks about if it wasn't for God, Paul speaking personally, and he's saying if it wasn't for God saying do not steal, he said he never would have found the occasion in himself. He never would have found the sin, do not steal. So that brings up the question.
Do you think that's true? Because there's like there's like natural morality. You don't necessarily have to read the Decalogue to understand that you ought not to steal.
Okay, and that's the question. Yeah.
Right.
That's the question is, do we really need a copy of the Bible in order to be with sin? So somebody then can't possibly commit a sin because he didn't know any better. I didn't know murder. What about Cain? There was no prohibition to Cain, do not murder. The Decalogue came about, the Ten Commandments came about much later. And there's no evidence that Yahweh tells Cain, don't murder your brother. And so Cain says, well, now I hear the commandment, I can't resist. So Paul wasn't actually talking about that exactly. You have to read a little bit more into what he's talking about. Paul became aware of his sin through the prohibition. It didn't I just
think that every non-Christian culture knows it's a sin to steal.
Okay.
I mean, there may be some culture somewhere where they're like, yeah, it's totally okay to steal. But I mean, it's like the most anomalous thing, it's like this weird curiosity, but all over the world, everyone knows not to steal, whether or not they've heard the Bible or not.
Right. But do you think that, and of course there's gray areas, which I'm not really talking about gray areas, no one's Paul. But if you did such things, don't you think that the thief justifies what he does? Hey, I was born, my parents abused me, I had a bad life, and I tried for these jobs and I couldn't get a job anywhere. So now I have to steal from other people. Right?
Yeah, I think, anyone who would be given over to that would find some rationalization for their behavior. I mean, we all sin. I think we all rationalize our behavior, regardless if we're feeling or not. I think it's human nature to rationalize our behavior.
Okay, and I think this is what Paul is trying to do, trying to say there is no rationalization. You can't rationalize it away. Because when the commandment came in to him, and when he became aware of it, it just made it more clear to him that the sin was wrong and that he needed to repent. He's trying to explain what the purpose of the law is, and the purpose of the law was to expand the idea of sin. It was to pronounce it even louder, that you shouldn't do this. And so when he became aware of this, that's when he realized he needed to repent for what he had done. It brought him to his knees because he finally heard the law and realized that his rationalization was wrong and that he couldn't do anything about it. And so I was thinking about sin. I was thinking about how we think about sin. It's so easy to get focused upon when we talk about sin. We want a list of sins. Churches are famous for doing this, and I understand that. I mean, because I wanted a list of sin myself. What are the things I'm allowed to do? What are the things I'm not allowed to do so I can do the right things? I want to do the right thing, so I need lists. But sin isn't like that. The fascinating thing, or the diabolical thing about sin, is that it can't always be put into those kinds of categories or little boxes. Let me give you an example how I perceive sin. When you were a little kid, did you ever play in the mud? Did you ever go out? Okay, most of us have, at least boys have, sometimes girls have too. And you get mud all over your shoes and you get it all over your pants, and it's fun. You don't even think about it. So you walk into the house, you're slopping your feet on the floor. Your mom just got done waxing. And what does your mom say? What are you doing? Clean the floor up, right? Clean the floor. I just waxed that floor. So you go and you go to get a rag. So you go into the living room to look for things. Well, what do? You track your footprints into the living room. Now, what are you doing? Now you got footprints in the living room. Get out of here. Go into the other room. In the meantime, you go into another room. So the point is, it's not the problem isn't the mud being on your shoes. The problem is, well, the problem isn't the mud being on the floor. The problem is the mud being on your shoes. We have to get rid of the sin within us, not look for the sin and try to clean the sin up, because we're just going to walk there again. And that's what human nature is like. Yeah, we see sin. Okay, I've got a problem with alcohol. So if I can clean my alcohol problem up, I'm going to be great. I'm going to be perfect.
It's treating the symptoms rather than the disease.
Exactly. And we tend to look at sin like that instead of thinking, the problem isn't in what I'm doing. The problem is in me, the one doing it. I got to clean myself up.
Right.
And so that's kind of the issue, I think, here when he's talking about the idea that the commandment makes us aware that I can see the footprints, and from that, I know I need to clean myself up. I should become aware the problem is internally, is within me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's just it. It's not that we follow the 10 Commandments and we're going to be all right. The idea is the 10 Commandments are there to tell us the problem is with us as an individual. It's within our will. Our will wants to go in the wrong way all the time. So we need a will transplant. We need another. We need another will.
I like that. I definitely got a will transplant this year.
And that's what it feels like, doesn't it? It feels like you got a new will, a whole new way of looking at life. So, okay, that concludes my part of the session here. Anything you want to bring up?
No, that's good, man. I think we're at an hour 15 or something like that. So, yeah, exactly an hour and 15. So we should probably bring it to a close. I will take over next week. Try to do as good a job as Bob. Bob's pretty good at this.
I think you will, and no doubt.
All right, you got to bring the jokes next week, Bob.
Okay, I'll talk to Monica, see if she's got any good jokes.
All right, you bring the jokes. I'll bring the notes.
All right.
All right. Hey, everybody, download the Noetic app. Every download gets us a little closer to giving everybody a university education. So brick by brick, we're going to build it. All right. Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome. Thank you, brother. Bye-bye.